In a previous video, I spoke for only a few seconds about the office of the Quaestor, before brushing past it to talk in greater length about the curses on him. Now it's time to delve deeper. Let's talk about Quaestors. You may already know that the Quaestorship was the first major step in a young man's political career. It was a crucial step though, because the office came with a lifetime membership into the Senate. By the late Republic, becoming a Quaestor and therefore a senator was actually an attainable goal for many citizens. Every year, 20 positions became available, which meant that every year there are 20 new inductees into the Senate. This meant that any wealthy or well-connected or popular aristocrat had a reasonable shot at getting into the Senate if they really wanted to. Hell, sometimes even men from the lower classes were able to sneak in. This was a lot different from the early days of the Republic, when the richest and most powerful families were able to monopolize the 4 open Quaestor positions year after year. So what exactly were Quaestors? They were basically elected representatives within the bureaucratic class. They had no specific military powers and very little political influence. Broadly speaking, within a system of government that had almost no civil service, they functioned as high-level bureaucrats. Let's get more specific. What exactly did they do? Of the 20 elected Quaestors for every given year, most of them were assigned by the Senate to provincial governors to function as their deputies. Functionally, this meant that they did things like serve as quartermasters for the armies, collect taxes, and oversee military recruitment, but ultimately they answered to the governor. Under certain circumstances, the governor had the authority to delegate military command or judicial authority to his Quaestor, but only in his name. Being an elected official, a Quaestor had legitimacy and respect as such, but no power. If the governor wanted his Quaestor to oversee the harvest while he was off fighting a military campaign, that was his right. If he wanted his Quaestor to serve as his right-hand man during the campaign and command one of his flanks during battle, that was also his right. Becoming a Quaestor in one of the provinces would place that person in the inner circle of a governor, doing some job that we would normally associate with a career civil servant. A few of the elected Quaestors were singled out every year and given slightly different tasks by the Senate. 2 were kept back in Rome and were assigned to the 2 consuls for the year. This was undoubtedly a prestigious post, but honestly, I would compare it to being appointed as the ambassador to Luxembourg. It's a great honor, but you're not really going to change the world. You could never ever function as a consul's second-in-command in Rome. At any one time there would be dozens and dozens of proconsuls and propraetors competing for the consul's attention, all of whom had the authority and the experience to command legions. To me, it doesn't even sound like a very rewarding job. Lastly, 4 Quaestors were appointed by the Senate to an unusual task, the administration of Rome's treasury. Yes, the overseeing of the physical gold supply, which was kept inside of the temple to Saturn. These were called urban Quaestors, obviously because they couldn't leave the city of Rome. The temple also secondarily functioned as an archive, since it housed all of the physical laws passed by the Senate. I honestly can't tell whether this was a prestigious posting or a dead-end job, and our sources don't really offer any hints one way or another. I can only guess that since this offered absolutely no chance of even seeing a battle, Romans would have tended to look down their noses at it. Then again, the administration of the temple to Saturn does carry some religious significance to it, so maybe it was respected as a stepping stone into the priesthood. I'm not sure, but I do know that in my research I couldn't find one great historical figure who served as an urban Quaestor. Everyone of significance seems to have been assigned to a provincial governor. Cicero and Caesar both served as provincial Quaestors as young men, but they had remarkably different experiences. Cicero was assigned to Sicily, which at the time was the breadbasket of the Republic. The city of Rome was growing at an alarming rate, with new urban poor arriving in the city in numbers that some contemporaries feared was unsustainable. In response to this, Rome committed to an expensive social program where they would supply the urban poor with free or heavily subsidized bread, which suddenly made agricultural provinces like Sicily incredibly important. When Cicero arrived in Sicily, he discovered that the grain prices had been rising sharply. Cicero immediately gathered together all of the local landowners and launched into negotiations. By the end, the landowners agreed to sell to Rome at a reduced, normalized rate. In Sicily, it had become common practice for local politicians to skim a little bit off the top of the grain shipments. This always caused grumbling among the local landowners, because it cut straight into their profits. When harvest season came during Cicero's tenure, he put an end to that practice. Not only did he earn a reputation for himself as an honest broker, he earned the respect and gratitude of the Sicilian landowners. They stayed loyal, too. For the rest of Cicero's political career, the Sicilian landowners remained staunch political allies. Every time he ran for election, wealthy Sicilians with Roman citizenship would make the trip to Rome in order to cast their vote for their man. Caesar had a radically different experience. He was assigned to the province of Hispania Ulterior, which is in Spain. This region was a recent Roman conquest, with tough, barbarous mountain people who were resistant to Roman attempts to civilize them. Caesar's governor was forced to spend a lot of time touring his province at the head of a legion in order to keep the peace. Out of necessity, Caesar had to step into his shoes. His governor was spending all of his time on the military, so Caesar had to take over the governor's legal responsibilities. He spent a lot of time hearing petitions, adjudicating tribal disputes, and generally trying to put out fires by imposing the Roman legal system onto the native population. Through our sources, we get the impression that Caesar only had limited success in bringing the rule of law to the people. The natives were a tough bunch, and they weren't having any of it. Towards the end of his term, he even made up some excuse and left the province early. It must have been quite frustrating for such an ambitious young man. Some years later, when Caesar returned to Hispania Ulterior as governor, he used his prior knowledge to his advantage. He immediately set out to civilize the ungovernable regions of Spain at the head of an army. He knew which tribes and which villages simply ignored Roman authority and swiftly forced them to submit under threat of force. Some tribes rose up and fought, but all were defeated. Eventually, Hispania Ulterior transformed from a barbarian-infested borderland into an extremely profitable mining province. This is partially due to Caesar's brutal intervention against the native population, which was directly informed by his prior experience as Quaestor. In the next video, we'll be moving up a step in the cursus honorum and taking an in-depth look at aediles. Caesar made quite the name for himself as an aedile, so there should be lots more about him in the weeks to come. Thanks for watching.